Tonight we're going to talk about the reading you did on Kiev Rus and the creation of Russia. So you're going to take some notes to reinforce the ideas that you read. So go ahead and answer these 4 questions. We're going to go over them in class, but you need to use your notes from last week and from your reading to answer them. Also, if you haven't already, this worksheet is number 4. You may want to pause the slide now if you're not done answering the questions. So our earliest Russians were the Varangians, which was the name for the Vikings. You might have heard of Vikings coming from the north, traveling on ships, and they came from Russia from along the rivers that came from the north, and they traveled, so from the cold water areas. The earliest Russians, these Varangians, traded with the local inhabitants, the Slavs, which are in Eastern Europe. Today, the Eastern European people are known as a Slavic group of people. Their ethnicity is Slavic. So we're going to have a joining of the Varangians and the Slavs. The Varangians settled among the early Russians, especially in Kiev. Today, Kiev is still a city, and it's in the capital of Ukraine in Eastern Europe. So the earliest form of Russia formed actually where today Ukraine is. Okay, our early Russians. Before I put up the text, I want you to notice the 2 images here and the people and the halos surrounding their head, as well as the scroll that they're holding. And what they're holding is the Cyrillic alphabet. It's the new alphabet that they're going to create in order to translate the Bible. But the Cyrillic alphabet is the alphabet you're going to use in Russian next year. So our early Russians were trading partners with the Byzantines. Again, the Byzantines are the most wealthy empire in the region at this point. And the early Russians wanted to have some economic gain, get a piece of the action. Because of their trade, they have a friendly relationship. And so Saint Cyril is a saint who was an early Orthodox Christian missionary, which means, again, he spreads Christianity. And so he converts large populations in southeastern Europe and Russia to Orthodox Christianity, the Christianity practiced by the Byzantines at the time. Because the Russians speak such a different language, St. Cyril actually needs to create a new alphabet to make it easier to translate the Christian Bible into the language of the early Russians, the Slavic languages. So he creates the Cyrillic alphabet, which again is still used in Russia today, and when you take Russian next year, you'll use it. Here we have a picture, an image of Justinian. He hopefully looks familiar. It's a mosaic, so if you're not done writing, you may want to pause. And you can see he too has a halo around him, symbol that he is divine in some way. So our Russian contacts with Byzantium. Russian trades a ton with Kiev, which is again modern day Ukraine and our early Russia. They become friendly trading partners. Just to recap, St. Cyril brings the Cyrillic alphabet and Orthodox Christianity to Russia. It's still there today. And Russia sees itself as heirs to the Byzantium as Byzantium fades. So our Byzantine Empire is getting weaker and weaker, and the Russians see that and don't want to exploit it, but they want to be next. Okay? In other words, Rome is the first Rome. Byzantium, which again was spread from Rome, was the second Rome. And Russia sees itself as the third Rome. And this is going to be relevant later when we talk about Russia and the czars. Okay, so Russia, one thing they do is they copy the architecture of Byzantium. So a lot of Russian architecture comes from our Byzantine architecture. You'll notice there's the Hagia Sophia with the dome, and it's kind of square shaped. Again, the minarets are strictly Muslim. They're not from the cathedral. And then there's a church in Russia. You can see similar small domes, similar windows. Okay, so our architecture is related. Russian and Ukrainian culture was very, very religious in nature. That's why I'm pointing out all our pictures you see, people have halos, etc. They focused on religious art, particularly iconography. So icons were images of religious people who you could worship. So you might have an image of Christ in your house, and you would pray to that image. Okay. Others are manuscripts. You see a lot of papers with translations of the Bible. And the churches start to blend Byzantine and Russian styles to get Russian and Ukrainian culture. Okay, our Russian hierarchy. You should draw it on the right with a triangle. But we have at the top nobility, which is princes, princesses. Then we have the boyars, which are the same thing as the nobles, but in Russia they're going to be called boyars. And they're the landlords that control the land and own the land. And then at the bottom we have peasants, who at this point in Russian history are reasonably free. So they're not like slaves, but they, again, don't make a lot of money and are not educated. Decline of early Russia, as you read, the Mongols invaded in the early 1200s, and the Mongols were able to conquer Kiev, the major city, and they allowed Russians to continue their culture, but they collected heavy taxes as a result, and they tolerated the Orthodox Church. So the Mongols did not impose a great deal of culture on the Russians, but they did conquer them and control them. So the decline of early Russia continued. The Mongols took over and ruled for more than 2 centuries. We're going to talk about Russia again most when we talk about the decline of the Mongols. Leaders of early Russia and culture never forget, though, the glory days of Rome, right? And the days when they were trading with Byzantium and doing well. And as a result, Russia reemerges after the Mongols, and it's very similar to before the Mongols conquered. There you can see the map with the Mongol invaders. And here you can see how big Russia is today. Notice it in the top right, the orange. And I'm about to show you what Russia was when it was the Kiev Rus. There, tiny little area, what is today Ukraine. So Russia has a big future ahead of it. Keep that in mind, but it's important to know where they came from. So we're going to practice a little bit about cause and effect. So a cause is a person or a thing which starts an action, and the effect is the result of that action. So cause and effect are an important reading and history skill that we're going to talk about a lot this year. So we've been making timelines, but we haven't talked about how one thing is to another. So example number 1, I have a little typo, but we're going to pretend that I, Miss Cassidy, said something really mean to Miss Sagar. I want you to write in the box, how would that make Miss Sagar feel? What is the effect? Okay, next we're going to use a historical example. So the cause is the Byzantine Empire becomes extremely wealthy because of trading contacts. And you need to think about what happened because of this thing and what happened as a result. Okay? And select the effect that you think is most accurate, and you need to support your answer with evidence in the how do you know section. So you may want to pause at this point to fill that in. Okay, example number 3. You need to come up with the cause, and I'm going to give you the effect. So the effect is that the Mongols are able to fairly easily take over the Kiev Rus, and you need to think about what made this possible, what caused this to happen, or what allowed this to happen, and fill in the cause and say how you know. So support it with evidence. and you may want to pause. I'm going to move on to the next one, but we're going to go through the same process in reverse. Example number 4, the Christian Bible was difficult to translate into the Slavic languages. Again, I should have mentioned for these that you need to be using your notes and the information that you've read about with Kiev Rus to be answering how you know. Okay, now you're going to finish on the back page as well using your notes and what we talked about in this lecture. Okay, we'll be checking these carefully on Monday because again, they did require you to go back and check your old notes, and we'll see you then. Have a great weekend.